Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miriam Aliso, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, The Art of Youth Development and Leadership Programming Development. Next. You will notice on your screen a screenshot of an example of the GoToWebinar interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop in the upper right corner. You are listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select Telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. Be sure to put your unique PIN. To the right of the GoToWebinar PowerPoint viewer is the GoToWebinar control panel. This is where you have the option to select the way you hear the webinar, raise your hand, and ask questions by text. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the Questions for Staff pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect this and address them during the Q&A session during the presentation. There is also, you can download the slides for the presentation. Next. Now we have Josie.
Thank you, Miriam, and welcome everyone. I am extremely excited about this webinar. This is a topic near and dear to my heart because this is how I really got started in both disability acceptance for myself, but also my work. So as you know, I'm Josie Badger, and I am the co-director of the RAISE Center. The RAISE Center provides technical assistance throughout the country on transition for families and youth with disabilities. With us today is also Michael Storr. He works for NTAC, and Liz Healey, who was the former executive director of the PEAL Center, the Parent Education and Advocacy Leadership Center here in Pennsylvania. Next slide. So this topic today, this webinar will discuss youth development and leadership programming and how it is truly a vital element not only to programs but also to transition. We will discuss the value of youth-led and driven programming, near-peer mentoring, and the adult roles as allies. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so this you may have seen from IEL and some of their NCWD resources. This is where a lot of this resource came from, the parts that I will be discussing. So this is an overall view of what youth development looks like. And youth development is really the pre-operational phase leading to adulthood. So in other words, it is adolescence, young adulthood, and developing an individual's skills to be successful adults. As you can see on the wheel, the different elements are connecting or socializing, social supports, and developing that circle of support. Leading or leadership is another element. Thriving is another one. And then the last two are learning and working. These elements are vital for an individual to go from childhood to successful adulthood. And often they are much more difficult for young adults with disabilities. Commonly, there is a lack of opportunities to try out different skill sets that will allow them to develop these different areas to become a successful adult. Go ahead. So youth development process, it's a coordinated progressive series of activities and experiences which help them to become socially, morally, emotionally, physically, and cognitive competent. And that sounds like a lot, but when you're looking at youth development, it is purely the ability to provide programming or opportunities that will allow an individual to become a well-rounded adult. It looks at using the strengths of each individual to obtain their maximum potential. And this is really important in disability empowerment. We are not looking at what an individual should be doing at a certain age or a developmental level, but helping them to obtain their unique maximum potential. And also the idea of being empowered through involvement in social change. So yes, of course, we want an individual to be self-determined and to have power over their own lives, but also to see what their role is potentially in the larger environment, hopefully in social change. Go ahead. Youth leadership. This is, as you saw earlier, a part of the youth development. So I want to really emphasize that youth development and youth leadership are two separate ideas. Although youth leadership is a part of youth development, they're still separate. So when you are looking at youth development, which is this whole sphere, this circle, you're looking at whatever will make the individual successful as an adult. When you're looking at leadership, you're looking at one's abilities to make change, to make decisions, and affect the world around them. Go ahead. So there are 5 approaches to youth leadership development. We're not going to go deep into any one of them, but you have the formal leadership, programming and development, supporting the development of skill sets. You have partnerships, youth partnerships, where you are engaging youth as partners in initiatives. You have youth-driven action, which is really youth-led civil advocacy. You have youth voice, which is creating that safe space for individuals to speak, to have their own ideas and needs be heard. And then you have youth governance, which is allowing youth to have oversight of these programs, which we would call youth-led, youth-driven. Go ahead. So as we've talked throughout the parent training information centers, we've realized that there's a lot of wonderful programs going on for youth across the country. Some of them are specifically for youth development, such as learning work skills, learning social skills. Some of them, go beyond that, make sure that an individual is a self-advocate, self-determined, empowered. But there are fewer that are youth leadership programs. For a youth leadership program to happen, you need near-peer mentoring, which is the concept of making sure individuals who are within a close age range to the individuals that they're mentoring are able to lead discussions and role model. Usually we look at near-peer mentoring as an individual who's maybe just one life step above the individual that they are mentoring. So for example, if you have youth who are still in high school, you might want to talk to mentors who would be in college or just graduated. It should be youth-led and youth-driven, where individuals who are young adults are looking at problems, deciding what they would like to do about it, and with support from adult allies driving the process. And then that includes the adult allies as key support members of this work, and then having the youth working on projects that can make actual differences, true change-making opportunities. So instead of just talking about problems, having them have real opportunities to make a difference, to have their voice heard by stakeholders, to write policies, to advocate in their communities or the capital. And this is vital to allow them to see that their voice matters. And through the work that I was able to do, I was able to see other young adults be empowered. I was able to see changes occurring at the state level. And the stories that you're going to hear today from two of my personal role models, Michael Starr and Liz Healey, will demonstrate how those programs that were youth-led, youth-driven, near-peer mentoring allowed people like me to have a voice. It will show you how programs like that can be implemented potentially at your centers or organizations. Next. These are just a lot of references that I hope that if any of these topics are interesting to you, that you are able to look through these resources, and they are very helpful in youth leadership. Next. So now I would like to turn it over to Michael Starr to talk more about youth engagement strategies and pertaining to how adults can support that.
Great. Thanks, Josie. So as Josie said, my name is Michael Storr, and I work for the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, or NTAC. But prior to coming on board at NTAC, I worked in Pennsylvania as a lead for secondary transition for the state through the Department of Education, Bureau of Special Education. And Josie and I go back quite a ways. About 12 years ago, we helped to establish in Pennsylvania the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, or PYLN. At the time, when I was working in the state, we were engaging in a number of activities around having youth participate in statewide events to develop self-determination skills, self-advocacy skills, but they were really activities that did not have a true youth voice. We did things such as Mentoring Day, where students came to our state capitol in Harrisburg, but really the youth were being handled, and they were not really given a true youth voice or a youth leadership perspective. So with that in mind, on this slide, this is a diagram of a youth engagement continuum. And this continuum was taken from a document that was written through the Forum for Youth Investment. It's called the Core Principles for Engaging Young People in Community Engagement. And while this is a little bit dated, this is from 2007, I think it's a really good model that outlines youth involvement, youth engagement. You know, starting with the youth services approach, which defines youth as clients. And it's really looking at providing services to address youth, looking at the problems that youth have, and really trying to help solve the problems for the youth. It's really the least engaging of the engagement models for youth. Then we move on to youth development. And when you look at youth development, this is providing services and supports to young adults. It does meet youth where they are, and it builds on their individual competencies. It is looking at age-appropriate supports and activities, but it still is not really an active engagement of that youth. The next phase is looking at youth leadership. And in youth leadership, this builds on authentic youth leadership opportunities in programming. It helps youth to have a deeper understanding of both the historic and cultural backgrounds of the disability rights movement, civil rights movement, and community engagement. And it builds on skills and capacities of youth to make decisions and become problem solvers. And youth are actively participating in this process. If we move into the next level, it's really looking at civic engagement or civil engagement. And this is engaging youth in political education and awareness. It builds on their skills and capacities for analysis and action around issues that young folks identify with. In this model, it begins to help young people build collective identity and to become social change agents. In this highest level of youth engagement, we're looking at really youth involved as a part of the core staff and governing body of the organization. They're helping to build membership, and they are really the individuals that are driving the action and mobilizing the actions of the organization. So I think what we're really trying to do as we look at engaging youth and as adults and adult allies and working with youth and young adults is to move from that position of seeing youth as clients, as serving, we're serving the youth, to the point where it is a self-driven, youth-developed, youth-driven organization. On the next slide, I've listed strategies for youth engagement. And these really do come about from working in particular with Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network and with schools across our state, Pennsylvania, in seeing how youth best engage. I think youth, if they feel that they are being listened to, they are part of the decisions that are being made, that they are not really looked at as a token representative, either on a board or in discussions. It's important that their opinions are recognized and that they are valued, that the youth are part of the planning process, that they are spoken to in an age-appropriate manner, and I think probably more importantly, that they are engaged as everyone else that would be involved in either a meeting or in a conversation, that they are not demeaned, that they are respected. On the next slide, we see some misconceptions regarding working with youth. And I think the first bullet on this slide is looking at the fact that there are some general stereotypes about young people, that they really don't know enough, that they haven't had experiences, therefore their opinions don't matter as much as the adults, the older folks in the room. That they really are not able to make good decisions for themselves, that they do not have really opinions that should be mattered in a discussion. And so those are things that we really need to kind of take a step aside from as adult leaders and see how we can best engage youth in this process. And while that's not always easy, I think as adults, and especially adults that work either in education or in agencies that serve youth, we oftentimes want to be the take charge folks. And it's important that we take a step back and really let the young folks that we're working with have a say and take a lead in the programs and the projects that we're working on. Also, there are system limitations and logistical issues, and we are going to get into those on the next slide. So these are some of the major things that I'll hear about that are issues or concerns when working with youth and young adults and trying to engage them actively in projects and in programs and really in systems change work that we may be doing in our states or locally in our schools or in our agencies. The first is really looking at scheduling. Oftentimes when meetings are held or we're looking at events, they're held during a traditional 9-to-5 workday. However, that's oftentimes not the best time to engage youth, and for that matter, families, in a meeting, an activity, or a project. Youth are engaged in schools, youth are working. So really to look at creative ways to schedule engaging youth. With the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, we frequently will meet on Saturdays, we'll meet in the evening. I think now that technology has advanced, so similar to our GoToWebinar section today, using technology such as Zoom or GoToMeeting is really helpful because you can engage youth remotely without having to meet in a general or central location. But scheduling is an issue, and I think scheduling needs to be taken into consideration if we truly want youth to be involved and have youth voice. If we're only holding our meetings or setting up a project that's at 11 o'clock during the weekday, and then we're upset that we're not engaging youth or families in that activity, it's probably our own fault because we're not really looking at the best time to actively engage the youth. Transportation is another area that frequently comes up because youth oftentimes do not have available transportation. They're relying on either their families or other adults or the school to transport. So if we're looking at an activity again or a project that we want youth to be involved with, we really need to take into consideration how is the youth, the young adult, going to be able to participate. Again, looking at the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, when we have had events on the weekends or the evenings, we look at ways of, can there be carpooling? It could be done with other youth in the organization that have transportation or adults involved. Also looking at other types of public transportation and central locations for meetings where youth can participate. Looking at accommodations. So much like transportation and that issue of transportation, ensuring that youth are able to participate in the best, to the best of their ability. And with the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network over the years, we've had youth and young adults with a variety of disabilities. And one example, we had a young man that was deaf and he needed interpreters to be engaged, and we needed to really look at that as an organization to best provide the supports that he needed. But I think having that information up front is really important. So as we start to engage new youth that are not known to the organization, finding out how they learn best, how they participate best, and make sure that we are allowing for those accommodations to take place. The last area, and this has come up, and I think especially in the last couple of years, issues around liability and how individuals over 18, adults, can work with youth and young adults. Making sure that the youth that are involved in leadership roles within the organization have appropriate clearances so they can go into schools and work with the youth that are involved in that organization. Again, with the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, all the folks that act as leaders on the governing board have clearances similar to those clearances that you would have in the education system. Okay, on the next slide, I want to talk about some additional barriers to youth engagement. So on the next slide, if we could move to the next slide, thank you. These are some additional barriers to youth engagement that we have found over the years in looking at youth development programs. One is for the youth themselves to have a lack of knowledge or previous experience. And looking at that particular barrier, it's important as adult allies that we provide information up front. There's a project that we're currently working on actually it's in the state of Pennsylvania, and we're really looking at how to best engage the youth in that project. And part of that is setting up meetings with the youth prior to the general meeting where the adults and the youth and the families are going to be engaged. And at that pre-meeting, talking with the youth about what expectations are going to be occur at that meeting, how they can participate, what the topics are going to be, and really laying out the framework for the meeting so that when the youth does go to participate on the actual day of the meeting, they're well prepared and can actively participate. Another area is low expectations of the youth involved in the group. Not thinking, again, that the youth can participate fully, or given the youth's disability area that they may not be able to participate. So again, setting very high expectations for everyone. Looking, that presumed competence model, that all youth have the ability to participate and will be able to add great value to any discussion, project, or activity. Making sure that we have opportunities for youth to engage is also important. And that the youth are given support to participate, and that we've taken care of like we had talked before, the scheduling issues and transportation issues to ensure that youth can actively engage. On the next slide, we talk about the fact of youth being as independent as possible, but it's important that we're also looking at this idea of interdependence. That independence doesn't mean that the youth, the young adult, is engaging completely on their own without supports. And it's important for families and adult allies to support youth as they're engaged in our youth activities projects that we're developing. And that even if it is a youth-led activity, that we are there in the background to help support the youth and young adults to be successful. Okay, on the next slide, and we're going to move into this next section, and this next section is talking more about the role of the adult ally and what that means exactly. So on the next slide, it's important that we shift our understanding or our view of how adults interact or engage with youth. And this is often difficult, and I think in particular for education folks, because we're, as teachers, are oftentimes in the role as teacher, as the person directing the learning, the person that is in charge. And I think when we're really looking at engaging youth and youth-driven programs, projects, and activities, we need to change that mindset. So rather than as the adult being the leader or the driver, we are acting as supporters. That we are learning together in a collaborative effort with the youth and young adults that we're involved with. And rather than just doing everything for the youth and young adults, we look at ways that we can help and engage. And again, using the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network as a model for that, we developed a number of resources over the years and toolkits. And it really was a learning process, but I think a learning process on both parts as an adult ally on how to best engage the youth in the development of those resources. And it wasn't, there were times where it was like, goodness, I could just finish this, but that really wasn't a good approach, and it really wasn't the best ways to ensure that the youth voice was part of those resource materials that we were developing. So really trying to get a balance of how can I best support with you as the youth, young adult taking the lead. Now on the next slide, what we're talking about is from an adult ally perspective. What do adult allies get from this relationship of working with youth in a program, a project, an activity? And these are some quotes from adult allies from across the country. One of the things is that the youth, young adults, really keep the adults who are working with them honest. They often bring up perspectives that we as adults really don't have an understanding of. And I think this is particularly true around technology, communication, how youth engage. I like to think that I'm not old, but I think as the years pass, I become older and older. And I really have lost sight of what teenagers today are doing and how they're communicating. Facebook is not a way that youth and young adults today communicate. So, what is that way? Is it Instagram, and how can we use that social media as a way to communicate? Again, we found that out with the youth groups I've been involved with, we were using email, and the young folks weren't using email, and they weren't looking at email. So, we looked at using text messaging and other means of social media communication to best engage the youth. And I think really looking at, ways to challenge our own thought process, and that really has been helped through that relationship. On the next slide, we're really looking at adult allies and ideal beliefs that adult allies should have in working with youth. Really having confidence in the youth, understanding that their opinions count, and oftentimes account more than the adults in the room. Making sure that we are tapping into all of the unique talents and strengths of the young folks we are working with, and most importantly, sharing the control and the power, and really moving from, like in that first model that we talked about, having it be really adult focused to having it be youth focused. On the next slide is a quote about partnerships. And I really like this quote. You know, a young person should see an adult ally as a person who's always has their back, but also knows when to back off, so that the young person believes they can do anything. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as adult allies, as we're working with youth and young adults, that we are there to support, but we're not there to take center stage, that we're there to guide, and to make sure that a project, an activity, the program continues to run, but we're not the primary driving force. The youth, young adults are. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some ideal characteristics of adult allies. And for adults, it's important that we share a genuine interest and value young folks, that we value their opinions, that we value their experiences, that we value the questions that they have. That we're open to opportunities for youth to fully express themselves, that we look at suggestions that they have and try to help them envision how best to have those implemented. Sometimes, again, it kind of takes one back. Again, from working with Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, there have been conference sessions they wanted to do or activities that they brought up, and I'd be like, oh, for goodness sake, I don't know if we can do that. But kind of riding the wave with the youth and working with them to either have an activity done or a conference session presented, using the strategies that they suggested. And, you know, oftentimes I would not, as the adult, have thought about those means of either presentation or activities, but oftentimes the youth, young adults have such a great pulse on what would work best, especially as engaging their peers or younger youth with disabilities in a program. I think the other important part as far as adults in working with youth is to ask the right questions and really to guide their process and their involvement. On the next slide is some questions that we oftentimes will hear from youth themselves about why they do not want to involve or be engaged in youth-run, youth-led activities, or meetings that are being held where youth are asked to present a youth voice. One of the things that I've oftentimes heard is they tell me I need to participate, but it doesn't really make a difference. Are they really taking my ideas into consideration? Another thing, and I have seen this firsthand, is when a youth presents or speaks at a meeting, everything stops. And that doesn't happen with anyone else in the room or when any of the other presenters or other people at the meeting are talking. And it puts an unusual spotlight on the youth that is not an equalizer. It really makes that youth not feel that they are on the same grounds as the other folks that are engaged either in the planning or the discussion that's occurring. So trying to keep in mind how best to engage the youth, to value their decisions and opinions, but also to equalize their involvement in the group, the meeting, the planning group that you're working with that youth on. The next section I want to talk about are some key components of successful youth engagement programs. So on the next slide, and we've already talked about some of these, but it's to make sure that the programs that we're doing truly are youth-driven, youth-led. That we do some evaluation with the youth on what are the particular needs and objectives of, again, the project, the program, the activity that we're working on. To make sure that we are offering supports and that we are engaging the right folks to help guide the project or activity that we're involved with. that we are developing the skills with the youth that they need to be successful, be they networking skills, communication skills, problem-solving skills. And then I think it's important to provide opportunities for both civic engagement as well as advocacy within their communities. And really that idea of how best to engage in the communities those young folks are coming from. And the next slide are some additional suggestions regarding engaging youth. I think it's important to offer graduated levels of involvement for youth. You know, as youth first join a organization, start out small and then build upon those based on the comfort and ability levels of those students, but again, keeping expectations high. You know, building connections for youth across different cultural, economic divides, providing as many opportunities as possible for the youth to take a leadership role, building on those youth's skills, and again, engaging the youth in the communities. On the last slide in this section is my contact information, and if you have any questions, let me know. We also can share, I have information from not only the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network that Josie and I helped to found, but also from across the country with some of the other states that through NTAC we have been working with. So please feel free to contact me if you have other questions. And with that, I believe we're turning this over to Liz. Or there are other questions. I don't know. Are there other questions?
Yes, hi, Michael. Yes, there's a question from Deborah, and it is, can Michael clarify what clearances are necessary for adults to work with youth?
Sure. And I think it really depends on the state that you are working in. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, we're required different clearances for adults to work with youth. And there are initials to go with these, but basically they're background checks to make sure that the adult doesn't have a criminal record, it doesn't have any types of violations that would cause an issue with them to engage with the youth. But if you look at what the requirements are for educators in your states or folks working in community service agencies, those should also apply if you are working in a youth engagement group for any of the adults that you have. So in Pennsylvania, there's actually 2 sets of clearances that folks have to have. But you should be able to find that information either on your Department of Education or your Human Services websites. So yeah, check into that. But it's important that the adults that are working with the kids in the youth organizations do have the appropriate background checks. You really don't want to, have somebody that has, a criminal background history, has had issues in illegal activities and engaging with youth in the past. You really don't want those folks to come on board and work for your organization. Okay, with that, I think we're passing this over to Liz. So Liz, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Michael. What I want to do is talk about what we did at the PEAL Center and some of the initial part of Michael's presentation about the principles and practices. I think you'll see them reflected in how we chose to do the work that we did. I'm the retired founding director of the PEAL Center. So first of all, we made youth leadership a priority when we wrote our 2014 application because OSEP said we had. They had made it a priority that year. But the real reason we did it was because we knew it was going to make a huge difference in the lives of youth. And so we decided to go all in. Next slide, please. Historically, as we developed our proposals to OSEP for our PTI project, we had 4 goal areas around awareness, information, and engagement. So we decided to do a parallel kind of structure for our youth leadership work. Next slide, please. And we developed a logic model for each of these goals. And if you're interested in the logic models we developed originally, let me know and I'll get them to you. But we had an awareness goal for youth about engaging youth, ensuring that they were aware of information and training that might be available to them. Next slide, please. Our second on information was to actually provide information through training and other ways to help youth be effective self-advocates in transition. Third, next slide. And our third goal, or in logic model that we've developed, was around improving systems, and that youth would be involved in the process of improving service delivery to better serve youth with disabilities. Next slide, please. So after we were awarded the grant, Carmen said, very ambitious. Carmen Sanchez was our project officer. She said, now let's get realistic about this and let's rethink some of this, because for the amount of resources you have to do youth leadership activities with, you can't possibly do all these things you said you were going to do. So we began working before we sort of got up and running about thinking about how to right size it. Carmen's first recommendation was if we were really going to make youth work parallel and at the same, we couldn't devote as many resources to it, but at equal importance to the work that we were doing with parents, we needed to make that person be at the director level and not a coordinator. We had a parent director of outreach, a parent director of training, and a parent director of parent advising. So our youth leadership work then was the person became a director in that area. We also, she said, you've got to pare down these activities. There are way too many activities on these logic models. You can't do it with the resources you have. So we began to try and pare that down. And finally, she said, you have so many data collection points associated with all of the activities you said you were going to do in the logic models. It's unrealistic. Come up with what do you think are the key indicators that are going to reflect the quality of the work that you're doing. Next slide, please. So we began by recruiting Josie Badger to be our Director of Youth Leadership, and formerly Josie is now doing a lot of things at the state level and national level. And I've known Josie since she was, my daughter and Josie often were in the ICU at the same time. So known Josie and her mom for years and years. And then Josie recruited, next slide please, Katie Smith. And Katie Smith was an emerging youth leader in Pennsylvania. And so we had a youth leadership team of 2 people, Katie and Josie. Next slide, please. So we had to revise our overall goal, and we decided that what we wanted to focus on was youth leadership. So we revised our objective from those 3 I showed you earlier down to this one statement: to increase and improve the self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-advocacy, and self-determination of young adults and youth with disabilities in order to improve their adult life outcomes. And so with that goal and a focus on youth leadership, the next thing we did, next slide please, was to look at the data points. And I put these specific things in here because I thought for some of the projects that might be helpful to sort of look at what our actual data points were. But overall, we had inputs about counting the number of youth who attended, counting the number of informative materials that we shared, counting the number of opportunities that we created or other opportunities we made youth aware of. And then the impact was looking at youth who have led presentations or trainings and helped to create new materials. So it was an engagement, simply, it was more than just coming to things. It was actively taking on leadership roles to do that. Next slide, please. And then we had a couple of others looking at the new materials that we developed and that we would, both by the team with the collaboration of other youth, and the impact would be, one of the impacts would be the number of youth then who began to participate in these networking opportunities that we were creating and collaborating with others around the state to make possible for youth. So next slide, please. So I had to be really opportunistic because we didn't have enough money in our PTI budget to really cover all of the expenses of some of the youth activities and the youth leadership institutes that we were beginning to design. So the first source of funding that we were able to get was through the American Academy of Pediatrics. They had applied for a Pennsylvania State Improvement Grant from HRSA, and they asked us to partner with them on youth work and youth leadership work. So through the funding we received as a partner in that grant, we were able to pay for our first several rounds of youth leadership institutes. Then after we had done that, the Pennsylvania Department of Health, a year or so later, began to offer transition mini grants. I think because they really appreciated the impact that we had had with the youth we had done in these first several series of youth leadership institutes. And then a year or so after that, the Department of Health, I think they had some money that was going to be unexpended at the end of the year. So they said to us, would you do some more of those leadership activities, and would you do them in different parts of the state than you've already done them? And we happily did that. So we sort of got money wherever we could, but interestingly, although Josie and Katie were employees of the PTI, most of our money to pay for our leadership activities was coming from the Department of Health. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a thumbnail description of what a Youth Leadership Development Institute would look like. They weren't all exactly the same, but generally it was a 2-day activity. The curriculum was developed by the youth leadership staff, by Josie and Katie. And they invited youth, known youth who were emerging leaders to come in and plan with them, and then to participate in the presentation of the Institute. So from the very beginning, before the first one was presented, we were engaging youth and offering them leadership opportunities. With the money that we got from the Department of Health and from HRSA, we were able to do these as an overnight stay at a hotel. And the young people under the age of 18 needed to bring a parent or another responsible adult who would accompany them. But the parents were not allowed to be in the room where the leadership activities were going on. And to try and keep them, because some parents were pretty anxious and wanted to hover around the door, we, excuse me, we had our parent advisor staff and myself set up sessions for the parents that were concurrent, so the parents had something else they were supposed to be doing. And provided them with so much information about transition, and they were really eager to understand resources and processes and how to do it, sort of all of those things that they were very engaged. There were a few parents who just chose to go off and go shopping and have a quiet lunch and just a little downtime for themselves. But whatever parents wanted to do, that was fine. They just couldn't be in with the youth during those activities. And then in the very first one, I had been invited by Josie to come in and talk a little bit about the PEAL Center and some other resources for youth toward the end of the activity. And I had brought a video camera with me. And just hearing the young people talking about the impact of this institute that really was a little more than 24 hours, sort of hearing them talk about the impact and what their future plans were based on their now sort of thinking differently about some things. I thought we should really capture these. So I asked the participants if any of them would like to stand up, and I would stand up, come to the front of the room, and I would record their statements. And just about everybody did. Everybody really wanted to do that. And it created a concrete and memorialized for them the new learnings and awakenings and the intentions they had for the future. And that was valuable for them to have. And so then as we went to do the next round, after the very first one, we went to do the next institute. Josie and Katie recruited youth who appeared to be emerging leaders within the group of participants to then help plan and co-present the next institute. So it was like this constant rolling, picking up from each institute. We picked up some new youth who then helped with the next one. So many, many youth had an opportunity to participate in that. Next slide, please. we go to the next slide? Thank you. So summary. So what did I learn from all this? This work really needed to be done by near peer mentors, and that they were the most effective in leading this work. So Josie, and it would have been very different if myself or the director of training or somebody else was trying to provide even the same content to the young people. The near peer mentors made a huge difference. So the best thing that I had to do was get out of the way. And I have to tell you, it required like taking a leap of faith, you know, like, oh my God, I hope this is going to be all right. But trusting in the staff we had hired to do that made a big difference. So as the adult ally, my primary job was to find the resources to keep these activities ongoing. We needed to keep finding more money to do them, and that's what I did to make it work. It was interesting for the youth when they applied. We had to, you know, Josie and Katie had to ask each of them, so what accommodations do you need to participate? And for some young people, somebody else had always planned that for them, you know, so it was the first opportunity for them to have an opportunity to speak up and say, well, this is what I'm going to need. And then saying, well, so how would you like that to be provided? To really begin to see themselves as responsible for what their life was going to, you know, like what they were going to need and how they were going to get it. And interestingly enough, within the group of youth in those institutes, the youth really, that interdependence and stepping up to help one another out, they seem to be much more interested in not having other adults come into the room and help. And so there was many times when many young people stepped up to help another young person with what they needed to get through the day. Oh God, my plug is downstairs. Another thing that we did was we provided, as Michael talked about, a ladder of opportunities to assume leadership roles and different kinds of roles for people with what they were comfortable with. We created an environment where we had a very, very diverse groups of youth come together each time, and each youth felt that they were valued and that their participation was important. And we gave youth the opportunity, and youth were able to speak with people in authority to make changes, and they had a tremendous impact on those people. Next slide, please.
We have some questions for both of you, actually. And for Liz, were both Josie and Katie full-time employees? And also,
No.
what level of education did they have when they were hired?
Josie was in graduate school, I think, and Josie was working, I think a little more than half-time, but around half-time. Could have been 2-3/4 time. Katie was working about half-time. Katie had completed a bachelor's degree in teaching and had been working as a day-to-day sub before we hired her. And Josie had gotten her master's in rehab, and I believe it was before she started working on her doctorate or while she was working on her doctorate. So they both had a fair amount of education. The youth that we brought in were like such a diverse group. And I think one of the challenges for them was trying to figure out how to do group activities with youth that had such diverse needs.
Very good. So there's a question for both of you, another one. This is actually for Michael. Can you address engaging youth with the full range of disabilities in leadership, especially those with multiple disabilities, including intellectual? I guess that's for both, but it was presented when Michael was finishing.
Sure. I think it's really important, well, first off, to have some background information regarding how the individual, especially with more complex needs, learns best and engages best, and making sure that we're utilizing those strategies. And then I think looking at how best to partner with the other youth that are engaged in the activity, to best engage that individual with more complex needs. So by that, in the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, we would oftentimes partner up another individual, youth with disabilities that could help the individual with more complex needs to engage in activities, whether it's difficulties with communication or mobility, but that's really how we have addressed it. So looked at how to really build upon that young person's strengths, but then provide the appropriate accommodations that they need.
Thank
I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I almost feel like Josie could answer this better than I could, but they really had to make accommodations on the fly because we got applications from people to come. Josie and Katie tried to find out from each person what accommodations they might need, but they really had to adapt as they went along. I think one of the biggest testimonials to the success of this was we had a young man who had participated, and his mother wrote me a note after the Leadership Institute he participated in, and said she was really never quite sure how much he understood about what transition meant, or she wasn't able to engage him in thinking about what he wanted his life to be like beyond what he was doing immediately. And after he went through the Leadership Institute, he was interested in talking to her about what he wanted to do, and she couldn't believe it. It really changed, from my perspective, what she was saying to me. It really raised my level of expectations for my son, because I didn't think he was capable of thinking about some of these topics. And suddenly, after having gone through this opportunity, it really created an opportunity for us to be able to have conversations about it, and for him to become an active participant in planning his future.
I think the other thing, too, to be aware, if the individual, for example, needs personal care or assistance, that's something that's thought about. In talking with the family and the young person about the best way to make those accommodations, I think that's something, if you can try to do that up front, that's really important.
Yeah, we tried to get that information from everybody up front and to plan for it.
Okay, we have a question for Liz. Does your state have a governor-appointed developmental disabilities council? If so,
Yes.
do you find they do these activities or we're a partner? And how about your vocational rehabilitation agency?
We do have a DD council, and our DD council, I think like all other DD councils, puts out RFPs for particular activities they want to support. They never had an RFP that matched up very well with what we wanted to do, so we didn't receive funds from them to do this. I think they certainly valued it, but it wasn't one of their funded projects. And the rehab counselors got involved in some of the things that Michael had talked about, where at the lower levels of engagement, where adults plan activities, where young people come, like the mentoring day. There's, sometimes they'll bring a group of youth to a conference and try and plan a couple of sessions for the youth to participate in, and that's planned by the rehab counselors. I wasn't aware that we had a lot of participation from Voc Rehab in what we were doing.
Now, the Pennsylvania Youth Leadership Network, the PYLN, they did receive a combination grant from the DD Council to work on youth leadership, work development, and they tried to outreach the VR folks. So there was some level of engagement, but I think probably was greater engagement from the education and IDD in the state.
Okay.
Yeah. But the rehab department made a decision that there should be a rehab counselor going to every transition IEP from age 16 up, but it didn't really translate very well into improved goals and outcomes for youth that we could,
Okay, we have another question. How did you choose geographic areas to start delivering your programs?
Excuse me again, how did we choose our which areas in delivering?
Geographic area.
Oh, geographic. Oh, okay. At first, when we first started with our first institute, we sort of did low-hanging fruit. Our office was based in Pittsburgh, and we did one at the intersection of two major roads, less than an hour's drive north of Pittsburgh. But then we made a commitment to doing them all over the state. And so we looked for places where we had allies. Josie reached out to some of the centers for independent living, some other advocacy organizations to get them to help us identify a good location, to help them participate and collaborate. So we worked with lots of different organizations and doing some of the logistics, but we did them all over the place. Philadelphia was the most challenging. We had a cutoff of 25 people. We told people as the applications came in, once it was full, we said it was full. And they're quite assertive in Philadelphia. Parents just came and dropped their kids off, and 40 kids were there. And it was like, whoa. We weren't quick enough at catching them at the door and saying, we just don't have, and so I think Josie really, really, really worked hard on that one. They had a lot of kids to work with, and some kids that they didn't have a lot of background information on ahead of time. That was a challenge.
Okay.
But we did them all over. We did them in tiny little rural communities, way off the beaten track, and those mostly we would find a place where we could do it, like in a high school or something, and we weren't able to include the overnight part in. So, we varied depending on the circumstances of the location, but we did them all over the place.
Yeah. Thank you. We have, we're a little bit behind on time, but we have one more question. And this is, what was the cut-off age for your youth leadership programs, teams, and what was the minimal age?
For the Youth Leadership Institute that we did, we tried to take what was in IDEA. So we accepted youth from the age of 14 up to, I think, the age of 26. I can ask Josie to confirm that, but we had some young people who were adults either working or in school in addition to high school students. We wanted us down, but 14. They had to be at least 14.
Okay, very good. So we have no more questions, and this presentation is being recorded, as we said at the beginning. And Josie, would you like to say anything else? Here's our contact information for the presenters. And you will get a survey after the webinar. Right now, after we finish this webinar, you will get a link with the survey. So please complete your survey. And
also remember that we will be sending the links to the webinar and all the handouts in a few by next week.
Correct.
And my parting advice to you would be to just, be brave, take the leap, find out from word of mouth, who are the young people who are active in your communities, who are leaders, and recruit them to help you do this.
Great tip. Okay. Thank you, Michael and Liz and Josie, for this presentation. And we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye now.
Bye. Thank you.